Good morning, everybody. So lovely to be here with you all. I had another email question come in that I wanted to make a video out of because I felt like it could be really relatable. These are my first words of the day. So far, I've just done my meditation, and then I did my morning pages, which is just stream of consciousness writing. So this is the first time I'm speaking all day, and I couldn't be happier that it's with you all. But without further ado, here's the question. And it was from someone who had read the book, my new ebook, that really covered, the beginning of my Kundalini Awakening. And they asked, that they had some questions that I didn't cover in the book. And one of them was, there's a few here. One of them was, when did I realize it was Kundalini Awakening? And that's a really good question, because I had like partial realizations, right? Like I would kind of suspect. My initial, when I first heard the word Kundalini Awakening, I was like, fuck no, I ain't doing any Kundalini Awakening stuff. That sounded terrifying to me. I was someone who was really super intellectual, and the idea of Kundalini Awakening sounded just so mythological, so beyond any type of conception that I could fit into my mind about how life and reality worked. It seemed supernatural, which in some senses it is, but it was just something that I wasn't ready to face, like the idea of a Kundalini Awakening, right? I had to go through a lot of the Western medical path and kind of exhaust that path before I was even willing to consider something as phenomenal as Kundalini Awakening. And then it was like from there, once I had exhausted the Western medicine path, once I had really just gone through everything I could go through to try to label it as some type of condition that a doctor could tell me, like once I really went through all of that and recognized it wasn't any of that, then I had to start opening myself up to it being something energetic. And I started reading, I'd read before, but I started reading more deeply on calmdownmind.com, how everything's just energy, and if you just, any type of symptom or ailment or illness is just a manifestation of imbalanced energy, it's just a manifestation of us suppressing certain energies, being afraid of certain energies in our body and not allowing them to move and to release. Once I started reading that stuff, and it really just, something in my body, it just clicked with me, and then I really just started, and this was still before I was totally sure I was having a Kundalini Awakening. I just finally approached my situation from an energetic perspective. Like I literally let go of all ideas about what I might be having and all this Googling and frantic searching. I realized all that wasn't serving me. And I just took an approach rooted in energy. And I was like, all right, whatever's going on here, it's just energy at the core, right? Underneath anything, it's just energy. And that's when I just started allowing these huge energetic releases to happen of terror, of grief, of anger. And I started to feel my energy body, just my whole being starting to come back into more of a balance. And while I was doing that, I would have crazy things happen. Like I would have energy just start shooting out of my third eye. I would have kriyas, what I thought were convulsions back then. And I guess you could say they are, but it's just kriyas, like the Kundalini moving through my body so intensely. And it was the day that energy started shooting out of my third eye, and then everything looked so vibrant and vivid, and it felt like, I've done mushrooms once, but I've never done acid. But I just intuitively knew, oh, this is probably what happens when people do acid. Just everything became so hyper psychedelic. I was just like, wow, I was just in a new dimension of existence where everything was just so alive and incredible, and I was just in awe about the simplest things. I remember going to Lazy Boy Furniture that day where I worked and sold furniture. And just everything was incredible. Like everyone who walked in the door was just like this divine being. And I remember just like everything, just the most mundane things that day were just phenomenal and just awe-inspiring. And so when things like that started happening, that's when I was like, all right, this is probably a Kundalini awakening. And that's when I really happened upon Victor Odo's videos. And they were just so resonant and just such a direct reflection and mirror for what I was experiencing. I was like, yeah. And so the doubt started falling away. And that's when I started listening to Craig Holiday videos and Andrew Martin energy videos. And that's when I really started finding people who could put words to my experience, which I had not found yet. And then once I found people who could put words to my experience, that's when I finally was like, oh yeah, this is a Kundalini awakening. And I was like, oh, thank God. This is amazing. I love Kundalini awakening. And to this day, I love this Kundalini energy. And that goes into one of the questions you asked. I'll do them a little out of order here, but did I feel relieved once I knew it was Kundalini? Yeah, the relief was when I finally approached the process through an energetic perspective. That's what really brought on the relief. Because even if I didn't know it was Kundalini at that point, I was so deeply connected to this inner movement of allowing that all like that, those pent up energies and suppressed energies, those darker energies that I was afraid of my whole life, they just started coming up and integrating and alchemizing. And so that was the relief. But knowing it was Kundalini was more like, oh my God, thank you, God. Like, this is incredible. And recognizing like, oh, this is what I always wanted. This Kundalini life force, this beautiful, divine energy is like, oh, it's so what I always wanted, you know? And I just was so grateful to be on this path. And I looked at my life leading up to Kundalini and I realized, oh, I've always been on this path. Like, I awakened into Kundalini, right? That's something that Kara Leah will talk about, is like how we don't necessarily, a lot of people will say Kundalini awakens in us, but actually another way of feeling into it is we awaken into Kundalini. And I realized my path was always this path of hyper growth and consciousness expansion. And even in my 20s, I was reading like every psychology book. I was reading all the classics. I was just digging and digging and digging for the truth, right? I didn't even know where I was going, but I just knew there was something more to life than I had been told, right? I was like, all this other stuff it's just not amounting to much. And I just kept going inward, and I kept going into these books, to this literature with deep meaning. So when I looked back at my life, I realized, oh yeah, this has been a movement my entire life. It's just that when Kundalini wakes up, the movement becomes even more accelerated. That's what happened for me. And I was just like, this is so beautiful. I loved it. It just fits with who I am, Kundalini awakening. I just realized like, oh, this is who I am. This is what I wanted. I want to know truth. I want to go as deep as I can in this lifetime into knowing God, into knowing myself as God, into knowing oneness, right? And that's what Kundalini does for us. Did I speak about it to anyone would be the last question. And thankfully, yeah, I had a mother who would listen to me and who would believe me. And I would just speak and speak and speak to her and just empty out. And I felt really heard and seen by her. And that was really nice because I was living at home for the early parts of it. And then I moved to Portland, Oregon, and I had a friend there that I lived with, and she really heard me and believed me. And that's just so important when you're going through the initial stages of Kundalini awakening. It's just to have people around who can really hear you and actually genuinely believe you. And so I did have that. And then, of course, I met Craig Holiday, and then I connected with Cesare. But by that point, the Kundalini was a lot more, well, I'll say when I met Cesare, it was a lot more integrated. Meeting Craig Holiday was a huge and pivotal point on the path for me for transitioning into giving my gifts. And actually meeting Craig was just another validating connection for me, because he was also able to really tell me, yeah, you've got a lot of Kundalini energy going on within you. And hearing that from someone who had been going through Kundalini for many years as he had, was also something that really just, really cemented, and just made it very real on a deeper level, this whole Kundalini awakening process. So I hope that answers your questions. I appreciate the questions. It felt really good to share what came through in this video. Just sending you all so much love. And if you're interested in the ebook I mentioned at the beginning that shares my Kundalini awakening story, I will put a link for it in the description and probably also in the comments below as well. Sending you all so much love. Namaste.